Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, the family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about
across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby.
How to relate to those individuals that have a different faith preposition, and also to deal with the issues of doubt and how we defend the Christian faith and apologetics and much more. So even though these are two different books and two different authors, it comes together in a way that I think will be very helpful to you. First hour today, we're going to be talking about this new book out. It's just volume 1 of, I guess, a series that will be coming out on world religions and cults, Counterfeits of Christianity. The general editors are Bodie Hodges and Roger Patterson. Bodie Hodges has been on the program with us many the bachelor's and master's degree from Southern Illinois University. He is a speaker, writer, and researcher for Answers in Genesis, and he is the author of Confound the Critics, The Fall of Satan, and co-author of Dragons, Legends, and Lore of Dinosaurs, editor of this book. And Bodie, always great to have you on the program.
Hey, it's great to be back on the show.
You know, one of the things you talk about early in the book, and you and Ken Ham write the introduction, is that you did a survey which matches a survey that my own organization, Pro Ministries, did with Barna Research. But whether we look at your particular America's Research Group for Answers in Genesis, whether we look at the Barna survey that we did, perhaps the largest one ever done of born-again we find a significant number of them, a very significant proportion of them, who believe that there are other books other than the Bible which are inspired by God, and oftentimes buy into the idea that there are other ways to God apart from the Scriptures and what Jesus actually claims.
That's exactly right. It's sad to see that kind of a statistic. This research group worked with Ken Ham, and I just happened to be looking right there at the statistic of the 20-year-olds right now who have walked away from the Christian faith. About 20% of them believe that there are other books, like the Quran, that's also inspired by God. It's just fascinating to see that sort of thing.
Now, there is sometimes a cognitive disconnect, and that is sometimes they'll believe that Christianity is the only way, then they'll believe there are other ways. Is too far, but the bottom line is, and the point I'm making is, it illustrates again why we're going to spend some time today talking about world religions, and that's really kind of volume 1. I assume one's coming out soon on the cults, and that will be volume 2. And these are important issues because it has always been true that young people get enticed away from the church by other groups, or else because of the confusion of all these different groups, sometimes just give up on religion entirely. And I know that's at least part of the motivation for why you and Ken Ham actually put this book together, and you and Roger Patterson are the editors. Yeah,
that's exactly right. It breaks our heart to see this type of thing. Kids get blown in every wind of doctrine. I think it's because they don't have a good, solid foundation in the Scriptures. I look back at my own experience. I grew up in church. I went to Sunday schools, went to youth programs, but I knew very little. I know when it comes right down to it, all the way into my college years, I'd heard gospel sermons over and over again. I could reiterate those without a problem, but, when it comes to apologetics, actually defending really defend their faith and to really be able to stand on the authority of the Bible.
You know, one of the things you also say early on in the book is something I do after I go through a whole presentation on worldviews, and I take individuals through various worldviews with a slide presentation, and I will talk about everything from humanism to naturalism to pantheism, and we'll talk about some of the world religions. But at the end, I say, really, when you get down to it, there are only two religions, either where God is God or man is God. And you have the same thing, that there are two religions in the world, gods and not gods. And
That's exactly
really
right.
what we're talking about here are these man-made religions. And because they're man-made, they have internal contradictions. Sometimes they don't correlate well with reality. And we can, I think, begin to dissect them in a positive way and begin to point out the logical inconsistencies. And that provides a context for evangelism, doesn't it?
Well, that's exactly right. That's why that was such an important thing. We put that right up the front. Ken Ham and I, when we wrote that is the introduction to this book. There's only two religions in the world, and that usually shocks most people because they think, they've heard of so many different religions. They don't realize what we mean right off the bat. All other religions, one way or another, have deviated from the truth, and that's based on man's ideas, where it takes them down those false paths, takes them to just a host of different worldviews. But those are all, in a general sense, a humanistic worldview where man's ideas have been used to supersede God and His Word one way or another. So really, it comes down to two religions. You're either with God or you're opposed to God on it.
Well, again, let's, if we can, maybe for those that are not God's religions, if you will, the man-made religions, are there some natural categories we can put them in? Because obviously you've done so in the book.
There are. In fact, we're going to do a 3-volume set on this all total, just to give the listeners kind of an idea of what's going on here. This first volume, we break into what we call the Counterfeits of Christianity. Basically, religions that one way or another might still pay lip service to the Bible, or they modeled something after the Bible, and yet they deviate. They might try to add other scriptures or things like that. The second breakdown that we're utilizing is what we call the moralistic religions. Religions where there isn't necessarily a God, but you live by some sort of moral code. You might think of Confucianism or Buddhism. That'll be part of Volume 2. In fact, with Volume 2, we're also lumping our third category into it, which is the mystical religions. You might think of Taoism or Hinduism, where they say ultimately nothing's real. But how often do these guys actually live their life that way? And our final volume, our third volume, will be looking at the atheistic or the humanistic religions. You might think of atheism or we're really looking at quite a few. I think all total we're looking at about 50 world religions and cults.
Well, again, it just gives people a sense of what we're going to be covering. And in the first part here, I did want to look at a little bit of that kind of from a philosophical point of view, that we'll get into some of the specifics. But again, some of these counterfeits, which we can certainly talk about, are things like Islam or some of the cults like that are related, Jehovah's Witnesses or those kinds of things, but also Judaism and some of the worldwide church and the unification church and those kinds of things, which, as you say, pay at least some lip service to the Bible. Now, they may begin with the Bible is true insofar as correctly translated, or the Bible is true, but there are other works that have been revealed, or the Bible isn't always true, and the Quran is the actual revelation, and there are errors in that. So you get different variations of that, but in some way or another, they keep the Bible as either part of that view, or maybe even foundationally, but with their interpretation of the Bible. Is that a fair way to look at that?
That really is. I think you summed it up beautifully. In fact, we make comment on that significantly. What's interesting is when, for example, if we go back to the New Testament, the New Testament, what was being said there had to be judged based on what was already previously written. Remember Paul with the Bereans, he commended them because they compared what he wrote back to the Old Testament to make sure it was right on the mark. And, they were commended for that. But, what we see nowadays is we see these different cults who say, okay, well, they go back and they judge the Old Testament and the New Testament based on what they're saying now, and that's exactly backwards from what we've typically seen.
We'll take a break and we'll get into some of these religions and also talk about how to witness to those in them. All that coming up right after this.
This is
says we shouldn't be cowed by these atheist arguments. He responds to these arguments in his new book, The Atheist Who Didn't Exist, or The Dreadful Consequences of Bad Arguments. He was on my radio program recently to explain how many of the arguments quickly unravel. His book uses logic and lots of humor to expose some of the loose threads on the cardigan of atheism. Atheist Richard Dawkins talks about a young child who believes that Thomas the Tank Train really exists. She also believes in Father Christmas. From there, he and other atheists argue that belief in God is like a belief in Santa Claus. There are lots of problems with the argument, but the obvious one can be seen in the belief systems of many young adults. None of them believe in Santa Claus. Millions of them believe in God. Can throw stones at religious ideas. The trouble with that assertion is that it proves too much. Andy Bannister says that means his cat is an atheist because she does not believe in God. Moreover, atheists claim their belief is true, and that is a positive claim. They really do have a belief system, and that causes all sorts of action. Internet-dwelling atheists spend hundreds of hours trolling, posting, and arguing. They buy books, T-shirts, and bumper stickers. That's a whole lot of activity for a non-belief. I know you'll enjoy Andy Bannister as he blends humor with serious thought while showing the fallacies of atheist arguments. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
from Giving Films, 90 Minutes in Heaven, based on a true story, in theaters now, rated PG-13. More information at 90minutesinheaventhemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Bodie Hodges with us today. He's with Answers in Genesis, talking about World Religions and Cults, Volume 1, Counterfeits of Christianity. And before we get into some of those religions, I know we want to get to Islam fairly soon, since we've been talking about that and ISIS quite a bit lately. I thought it would be good to at least focus on one or two of the introductory chapters. Dr. Kenneth Gentry talks about defending the faith, approaching world religions. It seems to me that we need to, first of all, Bodie, know our Bible. We also need to be able to present that clearly, but we also need to be able to defend the Bible against those who say, well, the Bible is a nice guide, but it isn't the Word of God. It seems to me that that's really key in any conversation we have with somebody of a different religion.
Mm-hmm. Well, any other religion, automatically they're going to say, well, we don't really trust the Bible. Even those people who pay that lip service to it, they're still going to say, not necessarily. And so what we need to do is be able to recognize, hey, hold on a second. As soon as somebody does that, what they're doing is they're trying to elevate their own thoughts to be greater than God's. Now, if we just step back and look at that perspective, how can somebody claim to be an authority greater than God? Really, the only way to do that is to claim you yourself is God. You're claiming an authority to be greater than God. And what we need to do is we need to point that out to these guys. A lot of these unbelievers, they don't have any idea that what they're doing is actually elevating themselves to a godlike status, and we need to be able to spot through that. Dr. Gentry, he did a great chapter in here, by the way, and it really does lay out the philosophical thought of defending our faith. A lot of people say they want to approach religion from a neutral perspective, but what did Jesus say about that? You're either for me or you're against me. There is no neutral position. And whenever you try to put God up and say, I'm going to judge God and His Word next to all these others, who's really the ultimate authority? The person judging. And that's just backwards, because God is the one that's in the ultimate position. So really, once again, we're reversing those roles. We're trying to make ourselves, or the unbeliever is trying to be seen as God above God.
One other foundational issue, we find that in your second chapter, and that is, what is biblical Christianity and why is it different? It does seem to me that we need to, for just a minute, explain what it is, because I've heard people say, and we can argue or disagree about that, but some people say relationship, and in some respects Christianity is not a religion in the sense of these other religions, because it assumes a number of things, and it's based upon the fact that God stepped into time in the person of Jesus Christ. And so biblical Christianity is very different from other religions, even if those religions try to claim the Bible, at least in part, as part of their assumptions or even foundation.
That's right. That's one of the things that distinguishes a Christian from somebody who, say, maybe of Islam, or maybe, say, Jehovah's Witness or Mormon, or things like that. They may claim the Bible to be true, but they've not really received the Jesus Christ of Scripture as their personal Lord and Savior. And so they don't have that relationship there. They've not come to that saving knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. The chapter on biblical Christianity is actually quite extensive. It's a pretty long chapter. Dr. Joel Beakey wrote that. He did a great job on that one as well. But what that really does is it lays down what is biblical Christianity. Mm-hmm. It's hard to believe how many people have grown up in church. They've never just sat back and thought about, well, what is biblical Christianity? What are the teachings? And I remember when I contacted Dr. Beakey and said, hey, would you be interested in tackling this subject? Because, a lot of people could probably do a great job on this. But I said, I want you to remember, all other religions that we're going to be talking about in this series are going to be standing against that chapter. And I said, so really what we need to do is, this is the chapter that needs to train the Christians to make sure that they know what a biblical worldview is. What is biblical Christianity? And so he runs through about 50 different points. It is pretty powerful. It
is a nice summary if you wanted to take a class in systematic theology and boil it down to one chapter. That's pretty much what that chapter is. So it's worth the price of the book as well. So let's jump on to some of the, jump onto some of the religions, because I do know that everybody's got the questions there. And let's spend a little time on Islam, because we have talked about that. And Dr. Amir Kaner has been on this program with us before, wrote that chapter. But I think it's important to recognize that Islam, especially in the beginning, Muhammad really presented himself in a line of prophets. Moses was a prophet. Jesus was a prophet. Now he is called the seal of the prophets. They say that they are the before books. That's the Old Testament, New Testament, but now we have the Quran. So initially, although there's a great conflict today between the West or Christianity and Islam, there was a time initially when he was a prophet of really trying to present himself as just one more, if you will, prophet in the long line of prophets in Judaism and Christianity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and, Muhammad, I think he really did believe that he was actually teaching what was perfectly in line with the Old and the New Testament. And, I think that ran into big problems with later Islamic scholars, because they started reading the Quran, they started reading the Bible, and they're like, whoa, this is a massive contradiction with each other. Something's going on. And, Muhammad, a number of times actually states that the Bible was true. Mm-hmm. He actually said that the book that he held in his hand, it was a Bible, was true, and that, Muslims were supposed to believe it. Now, if you say that today, I mean, how often are people saying, no, you're not allowed to have a Bible in Muslim-controlled areas and things like that? And yet, I think that was one of the things that really caused a big problem for Islam, because here they are saying that the Bible's true, and yet they're saying that the Quran is true, and yet they're in contradiction with each other. Just a handful of those things. Of course, the Bible talks about Jesus dying and resurrecting, and of course, the Quran says that didn't happen. We see little mistakes like Miriam, the sister of Moses, actually being called Mary. It was confused with Mary, the mother of Jesus. So we see those types of things. Now, this makes sense if you actually look at the greater understanding of Islam and its history. Muhammad lived in a predominantly oral culture. He's very famous for being the illiterate prophet. He couldn't read. So he had to hear a lot of these things, and I think a lot of the things that he dictated that was actually written in the Quran, I just think he just didn't quite understand what the Bible said because he couldn't read it. I think that might have been one of the reasons.
One of the questions people always ask, and since we've spent some time talking about ISIS and the conflict and the warrior prophet and all that, let's get to maybe some of the evangelistic things, because you have a whole series in each one of the chapters, but here, questions to ask a Muslim. And these are really good questions because they're conversation starters, number one, but number two, sometimes that will help them see if nothing else, the difference between Christianity and Islam, the difference between the Bible and the Quran. So you have a series of questions that you provide for the readers so that if they have a Muslim friend, neighbor, coworker, they can start a conversation.
Well, that's right. And the thing we want people to understand is, hey, we want to witness to them. We want to do it kindly. We want to do it respectfully. But we also want to present the truth. And I think one of the best ways to do that is when we chat with these guys, just ask them certain questions. What do they believe? Why do they believe it? I think a lot of Muslims, they want to be upstanding. They want to be moral. And yet, you ask certain questions that really probes them to let them know, oh, hold on a second here. Maybe this isn't necessarily what I've been following. And so I think those questions really do open up how a Muslim actually looks at, say, the character of God. They want to have a perfectly holy God, who's upright and, tells the truth all the time. And yet, according to the Quran, Allah is the greatest of deceivers. So when you probe them with certain questions, they go, okay, yeah, I see a little difference here between, say, the God of the Quran and the God of the Bible. And a lot of times, once they see the difference, say, between the character of God in the Bible and the character of God in the Quran, they go, oh, I like that God over there. That's the God that I thought I was following. So a lot of times asking certain questions will help pull out that certain information to get people to question what they've been taught.
Well, and that brings us to another very effective witnessing technique, if you will, or just a very good philosophical way to begin the conversations, and that is they did surveys, and I have this in my book, A Biblical Point of View on Islam, at various seminaries, but one in particular, they interviewed 700, now I think it's up to 800 former Muslims who became Christians, and they said, what was the number one reason you left Islam and became a Christian? Well, one of those, the number one reason, which we just alluded to, is the love of God. The idea that I can have a personal relationship with God. In the Quran, Allah is distant, He's unknowable, He reveals Himself through His holy prophet, reveals Himself through the Quran, reveals Himself through an angel, but He is not knowable. We can call God our Father. And number two was the idea of eternal security, that you could actually know that you were saved. So there are some very obvious implications that come from understanding some of these world religions, but we need to take a break. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Bodie Hodge, but also we'll give you a chance to ask a question if you'd like. 1-800-351-1212. We talked about Islam. Let's talk about the other religion of the book, that is Judaism. And that one is also one that is very important and a very significant chapter in the book. And then we'll get into a couple of other groups or cults that, if we have time, just illustrate so many different topics that are part of just volume one of a 3-volume set, World Religions and Cults. This one's on Counterfeits of Christianity. And if you'd like to know more about it, you certainly can go to our website, pointofview.net. It's published by Master Books. You probably can find it in your local bookstore, but if not, we have links to Answers in Genesis, and we have information so that you could order that book if you can't find it in your local bookstore. Let's take a break, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Bodie Hodge with us. We'll come back with more right after this.
2015 hasn't exactly been a great year for the church in America. Some are saying the battle for the soul of the nation is over and we lost. But remember what the angels said right after Jesus ascended? Basically, they said, what are you doing looking up in the sky? Yes, He's gone. He will come back one day, but in the meantime, get out there and be His witnesses. The church has faced many hard times, but God's not done with this world yet. It's critical that we know how to share what we believe and how to respond to the wrong ideas destroying people and our culture. What can you do? You can pray, and you can partner with Point of View. When you give by September 30th, one ministry friend will match your gift, $25, $100, $10,000. Your gift will be doubled up to a total of $50,000. Call now and give 1-800-347-5151 or online at pointofview.net. Now's not the time to give up. It's time to double up. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about the book, World Religions and Cults. The general editor, Bodie Hodges, is with us, and he has written some of the articles as well as the editor of the 3-volume set that will be coming out. And this one is published by Master Books, and you can look for it in your local bookstore. Of course, we have information about that as well. 1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to join us. And Bodie, just for a minute, we also link you and link all sorts of information to answersingenesis.org. And I know as they go there, they can find out a lot about Answers in Genesis, but also you've written quite a number of articles recently on such things as, isn't the God of the Old Testament harsh, brutal, and downright evil? Who sinned first, Adam or Satan? Wasn't the Bible written by mere men? So there's just a lot of great resources. I talk about some of the things that people can find as they go to the Answers in Genesis website, because this will be very helpful as they talk to individuals about their faith.
Well, that's right. You know, we have about 6,000 questions that are answered on our website, so, you know, somebody might as well bookmark our website because they can spend millions of years on it, I think. But, you know, when it comes down to it, I mean, we've answered a lot of questions surrounding Noah's Ark, the flood, the Tower of Babel. In fact, I wrote a whole book on the Tower of Babel and the different people groups and where they've gone. You know, the website is just, it's an incredible place to go to find out things, particularly about Genesis. Now, obviously, we defend the gospel, we defend the authority of the Bible, so we get into a lot of areas, but our focus, you know, over the years has primarily been there in Genesis. Now, we have some video on there. You can find out more about the Creation Museum. If you've not been to the Creation Museum is linked on our website. It's actually an outreach of Answers in Genesis. And you can also find out more about our project that we're working on now. We are building a full-size Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark, yes.
Yeah, and you know, you can link on our website to this, or you can go directly to the site. Is arkencounter.com. And you know, I keep watching the pictures. This thing's going up. It's pretty incredible. It's supposed to open sometime next year. My guess is probably don't try to plan your visit in spring. Try to plan it more like fall. You know, because just trying to get everything all wrapped up and done is it's a big job. So.
You ever have a flood in Kentucky, you're ready.
That's right. Yeah, I'm telling you.
It is something. Let's get into a couple more, and we'll take some calls along the way. But we talked about Islam. I thought, just to be complete, let's go to Judaism, because, again, this one may be the most difficult. We've talked about how to witness to our Jewish friends, and there seems to be oftentimes a closure to the gospel with some of our Jewish friends. But, again, you have some helpful suggestions on, first of all, how to understand Judaism, and most importantly, again, questions we might want to ask our Jewish friends that might cause them to begin to think about their faith as it relates to the true faith in Jesus Christ.
Well, you know, that's exactly right. You know, when you start to understand the divisions, say, within Judaism, you know, they had divisions in Judaism back 2,000 years ago. You had the Pharisees, you had the Sadducees, and the Essenes. Who were these guys? What did they believe? And, you know, we still, in one sense, have divisions within Judaism even today. We've got Orthodox Judaism, Reform Judaism, and Conservative Judaism. Now, the Judaism that has survived today is basically what the Pharisees believed. And a lot of people they just don't realize that. So, you know, in one sense, a lot of the times when we're chatting with Jews, you know, and I've done that, and I've witnessed to a number of these guys, you know, the fact is I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with a lot of these guys, you know. And, you know, they have a love for the Old Testament, but you know what? We run into the same problems Jesus did, and that's with the traditions of men. Now, there's a huge set of writings called the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. Now, there's also the Jerusalem Talmud, which is pretty good size, but not as big as the Babylonian Talmud. And what's happened is these were basically the traditions of man that have been put to written word. And so that has been elevated. So basically the Jews hold to, say, the Old Testament and the Talmud as opposed to the Old Testament and the New Testament. You see, so that's where the break between Christianity and Judaism really lies, is that ultimate authority being either the New Testament or the Talmud.
You know, one of the other issues that surfaces in your article there is about the Trinity, and whether you look at Islam, which denies the Trinity, Judaism that denies the Trinity, or some others we'll maybe get a chance to talk about in just a minute, whether it would be Jehovah's Witness or Mormonism. We have some of the largest religions in the world, and some of the most aggressive cult groups in the world that all deny the Trinity. So that's something we need to pay attention to. But also this idea of the authority of the Bible, because in some respects you have some comments here about the fact that, well, they believe one part of the Bible, the Old Testament, but not the New Testament. Of course, with Islam, they believe the Bible, but they believe that Jews and Christians corrupted it. Or Mormons believe the Bible's true insofar as correctly translated. So we need to be really good students of not only theology, but again, back to one of the things you wrote about just a minute ago. Is the Bible the Word of God, or is it the Word of men?
That's right. And, we can actually go back. We have massive numbers of ancient manuscripts. If you just look at the New Testament alone, we have about 24,000 copies and fragments of that thing. And when people study these things, this is called textual criticism for the listeners out there, they can actually compare these different manuscripts. And, what we find is, a word might be spelled a little different or something like that. But by and large, we have no changes in theology. In other words, the Bible that was in Muhammad's days is the same Bible we have in our hands today. And, when it comes to things like the Old Testament, we've got the Masoretic text. We've got, at least for the law, we have the Samaritan Pentateuch. We have a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. Then they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. And guess what? The Bible we had, over 2,000 years ago is the same one we have today, with regards to the Old Testament. So it's exciting to see that type of a confirmation. What happens is we start to see people deviate from what it actually says. Like with Judaism, they take the Old Testament insofar as their understanding of it with regards to what the Talmud says. Same thing with the Mormons. Well, we can look at the Bible, but in light of what the modern prophets and Joseph Smith have had to say about it, you see, so we start to see those differences, and that's where we need to start shooting off our radar, going, hold on, red flag here.
Let's take some phone calls. You ready for those?
Sure.
Let's head to South Carolina. David, you're on with Bodie Hodges.
How y'all guys doing today?
Very good.
Good.
I'm a religion and philosophy student from South Carolina, and I've noticed that God has taken mankind from a state where we couldn't exist today with our technology without God saying, well, if you stole something, it's okay to kill somebody and their entire family. He says, well, no, it's an eye for an eye. So he actually takes us from our barbaric human instincts and says, an eye for an eye. And then later Christ, he says, well, you're not really good at eye for an eye, but we're going to go a little bit further and say, turn the other cheek. So instead of doing something drastic, God is trying to tell us to love, to get further in our technological and human-to-human contact and things of that nature. I wanted to know, why doesn't God get credit for actually shaping the foundation of humanity, where we can build planes, we can drive cars, and we can have other things that we enjoy?
Well, you ask a good person here because, again, you have degrees in mechanical engineering and also thought about that. But really, let's just broaden that just a little. Christianity. And you don't have to take my word for it. We've had Rodney Stark on here. We've had many other people. The whole scientific method really came from a belief of a Christian worldview, that the world was created, and because of that, intelligent minds could use the scientific method to discern the patterns in creation. So the world that we enjoy today, that we take for granted is really very much grown out of and really the result of a biblical worldview, isn't it?
It really has. Most people don't realize that most fields of science were actually developed by Bible-believing Christians. You might think of Michael Faraday or Gregor Mendel or Pascal or Isaac Newton, these guys who actually stood on the Bible. Even the person who came up with the scientific method, Francis Bacon, was a young earth creation guy. It's fascinating when you look at that. But see, the Bible makes sense of this. You see, the Bible promises that God will uphold the world in a particular state until the end. That's how we know that repeatable, observable experiments will actually occur. We're made in the image of a logical God who created us in his image. And therefore, we could trust that our senses are reliable, at least basically reliable. Think about this in a secular worldview. How would you know that tomorrow the laws of nature aren't just going to change?
Yeah.
We don't know that. In a secular worldview, they might. They apparently changed at the Big Bang. They've somewhat changed in the past. In a secular worldview, that is. Why won't they change tomorrow? They might. it's from a Christian worldview and a Christian understanding, knowing that God's going to uphold the world in a particular way today, tomorrow, and the next day, all throughout the entire universe. That's how science is even possible.
To answer David's question, we're coming to a break, so I'll just mention it real quickly before we go to a break, and I'll send him a copy of my book on Christian ethics in plain language, because I think, the idea of an eye for an eye, that's in the Old Testament. That really is the responsibility of justice and what is, and if you will, a command to the government, and we see that repeated in Romans 13:1-7, but then the turn the other cheek is how we respond in terms of our own personal ethics. So certainly God should get credit for it. In the secular society, Bodie, we know that doesn't happen, but nevertheless, I'll send him a copy of my book, especially since he's a religion student. He might enjoy that as well. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, but we'll have to do that after this next break. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back with Bodie Hodges of Answers in Genesis for just a few more minutes. One of the general editors of World Religion and Cults. This first volume, Counterfeits of Christianity, is out. Of course, we'll talk about some of the others in future. And again, with a 400-page book, Bodie's no way we're going to cover all that in an hour. Didn't even plan to. But let's, for just a minute, maybe make a distinction, because some of these counterfeits of Christianity have sort of a Western base, and certainly Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness fits there. But one we haven't really talked about too much is some that have more of an Eastern base. You know, Rudyard Kipling said, the East is East and West is West. Well, no longer, because you have chapters here on the Baha'i faith, on Zoroastrianism, Of course, we could add into that the Unification Church, and I know in future volumes we're going to have everything from the New Age movement to Hinduism and Buddhism. I think it's going to be really important for us to understand the Eastern mindset and see how many times those religions say, oh, yeah, the Bible, we'll put that up there with the other religious works, the Bhagavad Gita or the various other revelations. And so in some respects there, in the Bible, they aren't really contradicting Jesus. They're just simply saying, oh, that's just one of many ways to God. How do we respond?
Well, what we need to do sometimes is just, first off, compare it to what the Bible actually teaches. Very rarely we as Christians, we stand on the authority of the Bible. We want to look at all of the worldviews in light of what God has to say. So, we can see the contradiction with that worldview with the Bible. But, another thing we can do is we can look at the contradiction within their own worldview. For example, we brought up Hinduism. Hinduism is a religion that's totally unique to a lot of Western thought. Just so the listeners kind of understand here, in Hinduism, they say that nothing's material. If you got a calculator on your desk or a pen or a pencil, they say it's not really real. Ultimately, everything is spirit. We're just deceived into thinking that there's actual things that are out there. A Hinduistic faith is, well, do you actually live your life like that?
Yes.
No, they don't. If somebody comes up and says, you don't really have a wallet, why don't you just give that to me? There is no distinction. Are they going to give you their wallet? Probably not. You see, so they don't actually live their lives like that. That is just a philosophy that's thrown out there. And, a lot of times you can point out the inconsistencies within their own worldview and the way that they live their lives in this world.
I talk about that as kind of a coherence or a worldview, because their world view isn't coherent, it isn't consistent, but also another C, it doesn't correspond. It fails the correspondence test because they say that the world is an illusion, but they act as if it's real. Now, you're a nice guy. You say, well, take their wallet. And I always say, I'll push them in front of a bus. And they'll jump back because, wait a minute, that bus is coming out, or they kind of buy into this sort of matrix idea that, well, we think this world is real, but it's really not. Well, it does not correspond with reality. And I think as we're kind of coming to the end here, this is one of the reasons why those questions that you have in many of these chapters are so helpful, because a man-made religion is going to have flaws in it. It's going to not be consistent. It's not going to be coherent, or it's going to fail the test of correspondence, just to pick 3 C's off of the list here. And so as a result, it's going to be logically inconsistent. It's not going to be spiritually fulfilling. And the only one that would be, of course, one that God has given to us. So it seems to me that that's an important test, and these questions aren't just so that you kind of are irritating people, but it really helps them see the problems with their own worldview. And if you think about it, many times Jesus asked more questions than he gave answers. So if Jesus used that evangelistic outreach, why shouldn't we?
That's exactly right. We need to do that. We need to step back and understand anytime man is trying to come up with a philosophy to compete with God, we're going to fall short. All have fallen short of the glory of God. All men are liars. Let God be true. When we actually step back and analyze that, all worldviews on man, based on man's ideas, are going to fall short. They're either going to be arbitrary, they're going to be inconsistent, they're going to go against reality. They're going to have these problems not only with the Bible but within themselves in various aspects. And you see, this is important because what that is a confirmation that the biblical worldview is the true one. We expect to see all these other worldviews fall and only God's stand. And you know what? We could use that. We can use that in evangelism. We could say, hey, guys, you know what? We've all been there, too. We've all fallen short, every single one of us. And because of that, what we need to do is get back to God and His Word. And you know what? Because God and His Word is true, guess what? The message of the gospel founded in that same book is also true. It's quite powerful when you use it that way.
Very good. Let's take another phone call real quickly. We'll head to Alaska this time, listen on the Internet. Daniel, thank you for joining our conversation today. You're on with Bodie Hodges.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Thank you. It's such an honor. Very interesting, the point about Hinduism and how that relates to how Jesus Christ said He was the ultimate truth. He is, and I think we need to understand He also as in ultimate reality. Now, also, many people are familiar with Chuck Meisler.
Yeah, Chuck Meisler's been on the program many times. Yeah, go ahead.
And, of course, we know also he has, I believe, a Ph.D. in physics as a physicist, and has mentioned that they've now divided matter so small that there's actually been suicides by physicists because they're not understanding these laws of nature, or if you will, regarding matter. It seems to be reaching an anomaly at a very small place. So I just thought that was interesting that we go right back again to the Word of God for the ultimate truth and ultimate reality. When we actually test matter, it seems to. I think Chuck Meisler, one of the works that he's done, actually says that this is indicative of would be consistent as this world, not the primary reality.
Interesting. We're just about out of time, but I thought maybe we'll get Chuck Meisler on to talk about that. But if nothing else, we come back to one of the points you made earlier, Bodie, and that is all the great scientists were those who started with a Christian worldview, and even the scientific method. Francis Bacon, a born-again Christian, a young earth creationist. I mean, we have all sorts of individuals that certainly have given us the scientific method. And it's kind of the gravedigger hypothesis. Christianity led to the modern world. Christianity led to modern science. And now today, the modern world and a lot of secular scientists are trying to dig the grave of Christianity. But we're not going to let it happen. And this book, as well as all the great resources at Answers in Genesis, are some great places to go. So just before we run out of time, one more time, mention what is available at the website, Answers in Genesis.
Yeah, if they hop on the website answersingenesis.org, they can get a copy of this book, World Religions and Cults. You can probably pick it up at your local Christian bookshop as well. This is the first of a 3-volume set. Volume 2 should come out next spring, and Volume 3 should come out next fall. We've been going through those chapters. They are powerful, by the way.
Well, say hi to Ken Ham and everybody there at Answers in Genesis. We look forward to Volumes 2 and 3, and you have a standing invitation to come back and talk about those as well.
All right. God bless you, Kerby.
That's all we have for this first hour. So again, the book is entitled World Religions and Cults, Counterfeits of Christianity. And this, I think, is going to be very helpful to you. It's a book really designed for lay people as well as church leaders and teachers and students. It's an attempt to really help you understand what are some of the major world religions and where they deviate from biblical Christianity. And there's a lot of charts and of suggested questions and all sorts of great material in it, and we've tried to do it justice, but there's so much more to the book than we possibly could cover in an hour. And again, it's the first of 3 volumes, and if you want to know more about some of the religious ideas that surround you, this is the book for you to get. And we have information about it and a link to Answers in Genesis on our website. So take the time to go to our website, pointofview.net. You'll find all sorts of great resources there, not just the one we're talking about right now, but many of the videos and other articles we've posted. But we need to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about how we defend our Christian faith, and in particular, how do we deal with doubt when we have it. We'll be right back.
Please remember September, the month that your gift of Point of View will be doubled. Give $25, it becomes $50. Give $50, it becomes $100. One of the ministry's very special friends wants to motivate you to give, especially if you've never given before. No gift is too little nor too big. Please give generously. Help us equip believers to represent Jesus Christ in this very important and critical hour. Call now and give 1-800-347-5151 or online at pointofview.net. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net.
From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room. Tony and Elizabeth Jordan's marriage is turning into a battle, and their daughter is caught in the crossfire until Elizabeth meets Miss Clara.
This is my favorite place in this house. I call it my war room.
And learns that prayer is a powerful weapon. War Room. Now play. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at warroomthemovie.com.
Point of View will continue.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Topic this hour is doubt, and let's face it, all of us have doubts of some sort or another, and we're going to talk about how to deal with those in an effective way and to be able to help others who are struggling with and maybe trying to answer some very important questions. And so again, we're going to talk about how to defend the Christian faith and how to encourage your own faith. And this all comes from a new book, Doubting Towards Faith, The Journey to Confident Christianity. And it is written by Bobby Conway. He's lead pastor of Life Fellowship Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary and also Southern Evangelical Seminary. We received a Doctor of Ministry and is also a PhD candidate at the University of Birmingham. Many of us know him as the host of the 1 Minute Apologist, and he is the author not only of this book, but an earlier one, The Fifth Gospel, and is also one of the speakers for Family Life's Weekend to Remember. So, Bobby, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me on, Kerby. It's good to be with you.
Well, again, a book published by Harvest House should be maybe watch and then click that others. Forward by Sean McDowell, who, by the way, will be in studio with us next week. So we're looking forward to that interview as well. When we talk about doubt, oh boy, there are all sorts of reasons for doubt, and you talk about some of the external threats. And those are pretty easy because we've talked about those on the program. Things like the so-called new atheist, the God delusion, certainly God is not great, and all sorts of writers that have challenged the Christian faith in that regard. And then you have others that challenge your faith about the Bible. Bart Ehrman certainly fits into that category. And, of course, we've had an attempt to really assault even biblical morality and a biblical view of marriage with all sorts of books and even Supreme Court decisions. So, first of all, Bobby, it's not surprising that many people, Christians and non-Christians alike, have some doubts about the Christian faith, especially in this 21st century world.
No, not at all. I like to say that doubt's not a Christian problem. It's a human problem. And in the absentee of certainty, there's always going to be room for doubt. The question is, which worldview best closes the doubt gap? I mean, think about it. If Adam and Eve could doubt in paradise, how much more are we susceptible to doubting in paradise lost?
Yes. Well, and you do talk about this idea that we live in a world, first of all, of pluralism. That's a big word for saying there are lots of different worldviews. James Sire called it the universe next door, all sorts of different worldviews. And even the first hour here, we spent some time talking about world religions. And then we have secularism, where the religious ideas are pushed to the margins. And we've talked about that with people like Os Guinness, so that everything that's religious seems irrelevant or maybe even bad form. So again, those are all cultural trends that have made the doubt issue even greater than I think it was even maybe a generation or two ago.
Absolutely. It's a lot more pronounced in the time that we're living in because we live in a melting pot culture. Jennifer Hecht, in her book on doubt, who's not a Christian, she talked about this idea of cosmopolitan doubt. And cosmopolitan doubt is this doubt that one experiences when their belief bumps up against their neighbor's belief that is contrary to theirs, and it creates suspicion over their own belief. So I think that we're experiencing a lot of that in our own culture because we've got internet technology. We're able to Skype and FaceTime and Periscope, and we're able to just see so many other people that we see as very nice and friendly. And then you have the new atheists who are certainly more incendiary and vitriolic in their attacks toward Christianity and toward just belief. But everybody has faith, because we're not talking about faith in some sort of an Easter bunny, but confidence in God and making himself known through his confused. I like to say it like this. We're like a nation without a mission statement, Kerby. We're not what we once were. We're not sure what we're becoming. And as Os Guinness talks about, that tweener space is very, very confusing. And any time culture goes through a revolution, and we're in the midst of a moral revolution, we are experiencing a lot of confusion as our values go from, we once reject something, then we tolerate it, then we accept it, then we celebrate it, and then we reject the very thing we once rejected, and that cycle goes on.
Again, talking with Bobby Conway, privileged to have him with us today as we talk about this book, Doubting Towards Faith, The Journey to Confident Christianity. And before we get into more details about it, I mentioned the external threats. Just real quickly, let's mention the internal threats as well, because it isn't just where the culture is going, and it isn't just the threats outside the church. Even within the church, there are a lot of people doing scripture twisting to cause many of us to challenge what have been the orthodox Christian beliefs of centuries.
I think we're trying to make the gospel more palatable to the culture. And the truth doesn't change according to our ability to stomach it, as Flannery O'Connor once said. And we have to be careful as a church that we hold fast to what the Word of God says. And I think that most of our diet is not coming from the Word of God, and we're often emotionally led. You know what's happened in our culture, and I can feel this as well at times, Kerby, when our emotions don't align with our theology, we have to do something. Are we going to make our theology, are we going to reduce it down to fit our emotions, or are we going to submit our emotions to a process of sanctification by submitting our emotions to truth? But I think we're often just trying to create a Bible in our own image that feels suitable to our cultural norms and that placates our emotions.
What about this issue of doubt? Because not all doubt is bad, you say there. But then as soon as you talk about that, because we certainly should have doubt about claims that are made by other religions and worldviews and the rest, then you have this very good quote from William Lane Craig, who's been on the program with us as well, in which he said there was a time in which Christians, even in the college where he was going, had this idea that sort of doubt is a virtue. You can't really be settled on anything. And there's a little bit of that even today in the millennial generation. There's really not that much. Everything's not black and white. It's mostly gray. And really the person who's sort of intellectually questioning things, that's the real, true, genuine Christian. How do you respond to that?
I think that doubt is something that we need to take seriously in our lives. It works like a splinter in our mind, and I don't celebrate doubt, Kerby. When I say that not all doubt's bad, there are some things we should doubt. I think we should doubt all non-truth, and that's what we are to doubt. And there's a process that we have to go through to get there. So Jesus can tell the difference between sincere doubt and skeptical doubt. Some people want to doubt. They want their doubts confirmed so that they can move beyond God. When I struggle with doubts in my own life, I want my doubts resolved so I can go deeper with God. But boy, I hate it when I've experienced the horror of doubt in my own life. And I fear that we are in a culture that people are celebrating doubt. Yes. And that'll end up in emergent church kind of stuff. And I don't think we should celebrate. I think we should take it really seriously and help each other to be able to, look, doubt's going to go a direction. You can either doubt toward unbelief or we can doubt toward faith. And I want to help people to doubt toward faith.
When we come back, we'll talk about this splinter in the mind. Thomas had it, and how do we deal with it? That coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Atheism is on the rise, which is why Christians need to know how to respond to many of the arguments put forward by the so-called new atheists. There is energy and confidence in their presentations, but Dr. Andy Bannister, Canadian director of Ravi Zacharias Ministries, says we shouldn't be cowed by these atheist arguments. He responds to these arguments in his new book, The Atheist Who Didn't Exist, or The Dreadful Consequences of Bad Arguments. He was on my radio program recently to explain how many of the arguments quickly unravel. His book uses logic and lots of humor to expose some of the loose threads on the cardigan of atheism. Atheist Richard Dawkins talks about a young child who believes that Thomas the Tank Train really exists. She also believes in Father Christmas. From there, he and other atheists argue that belief in God is like a belief in Santa Claus. There are lots of problems with the argument, but the obvious one can be seen in the belief systems of many young adults. None of them believe in Santa Claus. Millions of them believe in God. Atheists also like to argue that their atheism isn't a claim, it's a non-belief. Religious people have a belief system, atheists do not. That means atheists are free to sit back and throw stones at religious ideas. The trouble with that assertion is that it proves too much. Andy Bannister says that means his cat is an atheist because she does not believe in God. Moreover, atheists claim their belief is true, and that is a positive claim. They really do have a belief system, and that causes all sorts of action. Internet-dwelling atheists spend hundreds of hours trolling, posting, and arguing. They buy books, T-shirts, and bumper stickers. That's a whole lot of activity for a non-belief. I know you'll enjoy Andy Bannister as he blends humor with serious thought while showing the fallacies of atheist arguments. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Giving Films, 90 Minutes in Heaven, based on a true story, in theaters now, rated PG-13. More information at 90minutesinheaventhemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have Bobby Conway with us today as we talk about his book, Doubting Towards Faith, The Journey to Confident Christianity, published by Harvest House. Look for it in your local bookstore, but we also have a way in which you can order it if you would like to get a copy. And, of course, we have that video so that you can have a chance to sort of watch a little bit about that and then maybe pass that on to your friends and neighbors and others. So please take the time to watch it and then click that share button, put it on your Facebook page, your blog, or maybe send it by email to someone. Sean McDowell in the foreword says, Doubting Towards Faith is a refreshing book. It made me laugh, it made me cry, but it also made me upset. Why? Because I wish this book had existed years ago when I went through my own period of substantial doubt. He explains a little bit more about that in the foreword, but again, a great book to pass on to those of you that maybe are struggling with doubt, and all of us do, are those of you that are maybe wanting to minister to someone who is struggling with this issue of doubt. And Bobby, just before we took a break, you used the phrase splinter in the mind, and in your second chapter you talk about that. But I think we can recognize that in Thomas's mind, for example, there was a splinter, if you will, and he said, unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails and place my finger into the mark of the nails and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. But Jesus does not condemn him for that, but provides evidence for his resurrection.
And I love that about our Lord, that he does give us evidence. In fact, he appeared on several different occasions, and on one occasion to 500-plus people. Jesus was doing miracles, but these miracles were to validate who he was, and he had multiple appearances in his post-resurrection to affirm the fact that he rose from the grave, to validate his claims. And so I'm thankful that Thomas had that experience, And, we're not going to get that more than likely if we say that prayer in our day and age, because we do have the scriptures and the evidence is there, and we can see the results of the early days.
You also talk about in the book your own personal journey, and I think that's helpful. As a matter of fact, as people watch the video, you actually talk a little bit about that, but explain that, because we're all fellow travelers, and I'd love to know a little bit more about your own spiritual journey and your dealing with doubt yourself.
What happened is I grew up in California, and I never heard the gospel till I was 19. When I gave my life to the Lord, I was looking to get two questions answered. What do I do with my guilt, and how do I find purpose in life? And I found that at the cross, both of those questions were answered. I went to Calvary Chapel Church on a Monday night, and an evangelist by the name of Greg Laurie was speaking, and I just resonated with his message. And I really didn't know what questions to ask early on. Depending upon which church you become a member of, then you will inherit a short list or a long list that you're going to incorporate into your belief system. And what can happen is I went off to a Bible college, and it was a very, very, very conservative kind of a Bible college, which had very limited ways of looking at certain views on things. So, it was I felt like I was put in a theological box, so to speak. And what happened is when I went off to Dallas Seminary, I started learning the three views to the every one view I learned. And before long, what started happening is I started getting confused in my Christian faith, where I started thinking the church is a mess, and there's three views to every main view and then sub-views. And I thought, how in the world do I really know what I can believe? And it got really confusing. And so me as a pastor, I felt like, boy, some people want to be as conservative as they can be about their conservatism. And I'm going, I think I want to be as liberal as I can be about my conservatism without slipping into heresy. So I just do not want to be a heretic at all, but I don't want to die on hills that I'm not meant to die on.
Yes.
And that's a hard line to discern right there, but I fear that we're setting many people up for a future bout with doubt in the church if we give new analytical, creative thinkers a long list and say you got to be young earth, KJV only, pre-trib, and instead of just saying, you know what, I've been trying to tell my kids, learning, love Jesus, love people, and enjoy learning. And don't think because you've read one book on a certain doctrine that you've got it figured out. You don't. Just enjoy learning. And I'm trying to let them know, because I felt like my faith early on, a mature Christian was one who could articulate their position. So I was just trying to figure out all my positions. And then all my positions started getting blown up, Kerby, and that created a lot of panic for me.
Yours was internal, mine was external, and that is, I joined Probe Ministries. We began to speak on college classrooms, and we were really influenced in large part by a person like Francis Schaeffer, and so we said, let's take these Christian ideas into the classroom. And pretty quickly, you'd begin to realize what were good arguments from an apologetics point of view, an evidence point of view, and which were really bad arguments, and so sometimes you have those exposed in front of a lot of people. So there's a sense in which you can come away and say, okay, I wish I'd known that before. Somebody said, well, what about, and you go, never thought about that, huh? Or what about this evidence? And of course, I had to do mine publicly, but it's the same kind of thing. And I don't want to set people up for the kill. But at the same time, this is a great transition into the story about Stephen Jobs, because you talk about in chapter 3 that Jesus can handle your doubts. And yet in Walter Isaacson's book, his biography of Stephen Jobs, he tells the story of Stephen Jobs going to a Lutheran church, but he was really asking a lot of questions, but those questions weren't really answered. And near the end of the chapter, then you sort of raise the question, because I thought it was really good that Kara Power said, I wonder what would have happened if Stephen Jobs' pastor had walked through his doubts with him. What would have happened if the pastor had answered, Steve, that's a good question. I don't know the answer, but I'd love to meet again to study Scripture and see if we can figure it out together. Mm-hmm. The sad reality is, and you know this only so well, Bobby, and I found this out by all sorts of surveys and other things that we've done, and even from comments made to us on the radio, that there are a lot of people, when they ask those questions, maybe in middle school, maybe even in grade school, but certainly in middle school or high school, there is a tendency sometimes in these churches, and even by youth pastors or even by parents, all well-meaning, to say, well, you really shouldn't ask those questions. And if you don't get a good answer then, sooner or later, all those external and internal forces we were talking about will begin to create tremendous amount of doubt. and then people begin to drift away from Orthodox Christianity, don't they?
I think they do. And people in the church are often threatened by doubts. It's kind of like we're addicted to going from one extreme to the next. It seems like we're either celebrating them or we're just fearful of them. And I think that we need to let people doubt out loud so that we can help them to doubt toward faith. People are going to have their doubts, and I certainly don't want them to doubt in silence. But I think the church can get really superficial and, like showing up in a small group saying, I read my Bible this past week and I read the story about Babel, and honestly, as I was reading, I just couldn't relate to that. I found myself struggling with doubt. It's almost like there's certain things that are taboo that you're not allowed to say. And I want to look. We believe the Bible is the Word of God, that God is truth, and our worldview can handle tough questions. And we're not just bringing out questions to just show off our skepticism. We bring out questions when somebody is in inner turmoil. And Kerby, one of the things that I talk about in the book is the obsessive analyzer. That's my wiring as an individual. I talk about that being, in my opinion, the most, if you're wired as an obsessive analyzer, doubt can really mess this person up, because if you're obsessive and you don't analyze, you might not even know what questions to ask. If you analyze but you're not obsessive, you may not get locked in. But the obsessive analyzer can fixate so much that they can lock in and they don't know how to step back and see the big picture, and their intellectual doubts can absorb into their emotions, and it can really be paralyzing. And they need churches to help them walk through that.
I would certainly say so. But again, you talk about the fact that we should be vulnerable enough to reveal our doubts to others, and certainly get in the habit of taking our doubts to Jesus, and be specific, and to begin to address those issues, and never forget that Jesus can handle your doubts, and also to take comfort in knowing that even if you have those doubts, you're still valuable to Jesus. So certainly a lot that we can talk about in the second half of the and those of doubt that we can get into, but also along the way, if you'd like to join the conversation, this probably is one of those where you kind of sit back and listen, but if there's a question or comment you have, we certainly do welcome your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. The book is published by Harvest House. The title is Doubting Towards Faith, The Journey to Confident Christianity. You can click on the picture of Bobby Conway, and that will take you to bobbyconwayonline.com, and you will find lots of great material there, and we'll spend a little more time in just a few minutes talking about his blog and his other resources that are there, including his book. We also have the video, and so if you'd like to watch that, it's a little over 4 minutes, and so it's an opportunity for you to know a little bit more about doubtingtowardfaith.com as well. So there are just lots of resources we've posted on the website, and of course those all collect around the book, Doubting Towards Faith, published by Harvest House. And so again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to find some of the information I've just mentioned, go to our website, pointofview.net. Lots of resources there. Take advantage of them, and we'll be back with more right after this.
From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room. Tony and Elizabeth Jordan's marriage is turning into a battle, and their daughter is caught in the crossfire until Elizabeth meets Miss Clara.
This is my favorite place in this house. I call it my war room.
And learns that prayer is a powerful weapon. War Room. Now playing. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at warroomthemovie.com.
As you fight in your war room, please include Kerby and Point of View in your prayers. We have a very important opportunity right now. A wonderful friend has said that he will match every gift in September up to a total of $50,000. Point of View needs that support to keep equipping you for your life inside and outside your war room, both as you pray and as you live. So please call now and give generously. 1-800-347-5151 or online at pointofview.net. That's 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us Bobby Conway as we talk about his book, Doubting Towards Faith, The Journey to Confident Christianity. And if you'd like to join us, we will take those phone calls. Let me take at least one right now in North Carolina. Erica, thank you for calling today. You're on with Bobby Conway.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering the call. And I really enjoy your program. What I called in to say was I agree wholeheartedly with Bobby Conway in regards to having doubts. Having studied postgraduate work in ministry and then starting at seminary, there were so many things that were open to me and opened my eyes about a lot of things in the Bible. It made me study more, read more, and ask a lot of questions. So I totally agree that you can doubt, but it doesn't mean that you give up your faith. You just keep digging deeper and keep reading and trusting in His Word.
You know, I think what he said just a minute ago about going to seminary and then saying, oh, there's three views for this and there's sub-views for that, and whether you're talking about origins or whether you're talking about eschatology or some of those, it can get kind of confusing when you realize that it's maybe a little more complex, or there are a little more nuances than you may have heard when you first heard some of that in a Sunday school class or even in a Bible college, right?
Right. What I like is that it ties it together with history. Everything is tied together, so it becomes less confusing the more you study.
Bobby, let me give you a chance to respond. I just appreciate the fact that you were so vulnerable to share that.
Well, I think that, as I thought about this book, Doubting Towards Faith, I wouldn't have been able to write it had I not went through that. And, sometimes when we're suffering, what we want to do is we want to get out of it instead of asking what we can get out of it. And I know for me, going through that struggle in my life, if going through some of these questions and being vulnerable about these doubts can help others who are struggling, then that's wonderful, because you see that in 2 Corinthians in chapter 1, that God comforts us in our affliction so that we can in turn comfort those who are also afflicted. And doubt is a form of deep affliction. In fact, I think it sent me, Kerby, into deep, deep depression.
Wow.
And deeply depressed. And I think the reason is because, look, my whole life has been in the ministry. I'm a pastor. I'm an apologist. I've prepared for this thing. And then when you're sitting there in a moment going, God, are you there? That's a scary thought. And the reason I panicked wasn't because I didn't love God. It's because I love Him so much. I can't imagine what life would be like without Him. And, sometimes God just feels shy and distant from us. And we learn things when we trust in Him and depend upon Him, and we grow through Him. And we can learn so much when we despair in life, when we'll get behind our despair and surrender to God. And so for those who are doubting, I just encourage them to don't celebrate it, take it very seriously, but use it as an opportunity to grow. Doubt can be the making of a Christian apologist.
Wow. Erica, I might just mention that we have the video, and you might want to watch that, because I think you get some of it there. And then I think this book would be one that you would really appreciate, given your background.
Okay, well, thanks. Great. I agree. I like that. And it was one thing you said, getting out of it instead of getting something out of it.
Yeah, what a great line.
I like that. Okay, well, great. Thank you. Have a great day.
We'll take some more phone calls in just a minute, but I thought we'd put a few of the so-called doubt triggers on the table. One of the triggers, you say, is apparent ridiculousness, and that is how sometimes in our modern world we think about whether it's the parting of the Red Sea reason, or another doubt trigger is demanding certainty, when sometimes that's just something we can't get from history or even from various kinds of gospel stories. So what about some of these doubt triggers? How do they affect us, and why should we know about those?
Doubt looks different for so many people. We each have our own experiences that we go through, and I just tried to identify some of the common triggers. But the apparent ridiculous has been something that's created doubts for me from the standpoint of I can't relate to the biblical world all the time. I live in the 21st century. And I don't think we realize sometimes as Christians how much we are influenced by this secular, pluralistic culture that we live in. And so when you read certain stories in the Bible, like Samson taking out 1,000 people with a jawbone, you're not trying to be skeptical as a Christian sometimes just because you have that question. You're trying to figure out what's going on there. And so there's a lot of weird things, fallen bread and I think we talk about, the stuff that Mormons believe and how bizarre. Well, we believe some kind of bizarre things too. And I think that I had to come to terms with, how do I understand some of these things? And some of these things that are hard to relate to, because one of the dangers is to impose a 21st century worldview on an ancient day milieu. That will set us up to experience doubt. And so I had to learn about ancient cultures and how God was meeting them in their own time. And, so what often happens is we have a doubt, it's triggered, and we can feel a little bit of panic, and then we study, and then we learn and we grow. But we need to apply what Martin Lloyd-Jones said: faith is the refusal to panic. And that's one of my weaknesses, Kerby. Sometimes I just panic unnecessarily so, and I wish I didn't.
Yes. Well, and also one of the other triggers is apparent Bible contradictions. Now, the good news is there are some excellent books that have been written over the centuries and even more recently in the last 2 decades on that. But again, some of that has to do with maybe taking on something that causes you a question or a doubt. And I've encouraged that here as well. And I've heard William Lane Craig and others say, take on an issue and study it. And when you come out on the other side and you find an answer, way to build up our spiritual muscles, if you will. But let me take another phone call, because this one relates again to a friend of one of our listeners. So we'll go to KNEO in Missouri. Philip, you're on with Bobby Conway.
Yes, sir. I have a very good friend, longtime friend, that was abused as a child, and he's dealing with the results of that, and he's dealt with that. He's come a long way, and now it seems almost like he's in the middle of a spiritual battle of apologetics, where he's struggling with exactly what you're talking about. And I've tried to be supportive. I've tried to logically talk about the things that he's struggling with, but he'll get off on a point. And he knows he's doing it. He's exactly like you were describing just a few moments ago. He's very analytical, and I am too. And I had a lot longer to deal with these things. And I'm just wondering, is there anything else that I can do to help him? He's struggled with not only doubting Christian, but exploring other religions just to make sure that he's not following the wrong path. And he continues to try to be a good Christian and to follow the Bible and listen to what Christ says, and I'm just trying to find out if there's any more that I can do to help him.
Blaise Pascal once said, "There's enough light for those who want to believe and enough shadows to blind those who don't." And I think that there is a limit to apologetics, and here's what I mean by that. When we think of the Christian life and we go through it, it's sort of like, you first recognize God and you see who he is, and then, you start to get discipled and you start growing in that, and then you start going out and discipling others, and you feel really confident early on and bold, and sometimes we come across self-righteous at this stage, and then what can often happen is we slip into it like a dark night of the soul. With our faith, where we start questioning the answers that we once thought we had, or our certainty feels like confusion. And what happens is, on the early stages of the dark night of the soul, we can turn to apologetics to help us. So we start looking at apologetics. But what happens is for every answer that you chase down, you often collect another 10 questions. And every book you read, you often learn 10 more books you need to read. And so somewhere along the line, the snowball of questions grows and grows and grows.
Yes.
And what I have found in my own life that has helped me is just to recognize the limits of my finitude, to recognize that, hey, apologetics gives me enough to know that I am within my reason to believe, and that Christianity, in my opinion, best closes the doubt gap. At the same token, I kind of want to be the mystical apologist. It's like I believe that that God can do more in one moment, one powerful experience with him than all the books I've read. In fact, Thomas Aquinas, the great philosopher, put his pen down after having an overwhelming experience while celebrating Mass. And so I think sometimes we're trying to feel great about our faith in our mind only, and we cannot abort our heart from our head. We have to pray, we have to fast, we have to seek God, we have to be vulnerable. And there's something that I have figured out in my life is God meets me in prayer. And sometimes if I just sit around and try to read my way out of my struggles only, apart from prayer, I'm going to end up struggling. So encourage them to go hard after the heart of God.
We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Bobby Conway with us just for a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Doubting Towards Faith, The Journey to Confident Christianity. And Bobby, of course, we are talking about different kinds of doubt, emotional doubt and intellectual doubt and volitional doubt. But you have a chapter here on navigating doubt. And just as you were sharing some of that with Philip, what would you say to listeners right now to deal with different kinds of doubt? Because obviously the answers are a little bit different based upon the kind of doubt that you might have.
Yeah, that is true. And I think when we are doubting, I talk about, just force ranking your doubts. Put them down on paper. Because what you'll find is if you just kind of take your doubts that you've got and just start writing out the questions, and then, group your doubts. What you can find is, after you force rank it, is, wow, most of my questions tend to be on what happens to those who've never heard about Jesus, or what about, God, how can it be good with so much suffering in the world? Or you can begin to see, what is the nature, the common theme? And then that becomes your study guide. And you start studying in that area. Sometimes we could read so much more wisely. Where do we need to read? Well, where are you suffering? Because where we're suffering should be a great place to start reading and growing. And oftentimes it's in our suffering where we can struggle the most with our doubts.
So again, there's obviously a need for us to kind of think through why we're having those doubts. And then most importantly, obviously, of course, we want to trust in what God might be doing in our lives. But at the same time, just beginning to trust in, of course, Him, but also figuring out how to apply our faith and even the evidence for our faith in those very significant ways, so that we no longer are being tossed to and fro like a ship on the ocean, to use a great biblical metaphor there.
I love the story of John the Baptist when he struggles with doubt. I mean, of all people, John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus, the one who said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." It's easy to be bold when you're out in public and you're free, but when your head's about to go to a chopping block. And here John sends his disciples with his doubts. Number one, it tells us that John was a vulnerable leader to admit that to his doubts. And you can imagine the doubts going, you can imagine the disciples going off with his doubts thinking, wait, we're carrying your doubts to Jesus? We've left everything to follow you. We believe this. And so what does Jesus do, though, in that moment? He gives John evidence, because John will know, hey, go find out if he's the Messiah. Go tell John that the blind see, that the lame walk, that the deaf hear. In other words, what we knew of the Old Testament and the Old Testament of the Messiah to come, it's happening through me right now. So he worked like a great Christian apologist, giving evidences for him. And guess what I love the most, Kerby, and you know where I'm going with this, is Jesus says, on the heels of John's doubt, behold, I tell you, no one has been born greater among women than John. So Jesus can handle our doubts.
I would say so. If we can, for just a minute, talk about some of the websites. So we have the link, of course, doubtingtowardfaith.com, bobbyconwayonline.com. So for just a few minutes, I'd love to have you as a pastor speak to other pastors. I know that there are pastors that listen to this program. I know that there are seminary students who are future pastors. And of course, I know I have, just from the people that have called in over the years, lots of people that teach Bible studies and small groups and things of that nature. So what would you say about how people can take some of the resources on your website and some of the material in your book and use that in a way to encourage other people in the body of Christ?
Well, we've created a website, oneminuteapologist.com, and we've got almost 800 videos where I interview some of the world-leading philosophers and apologists, and then I do a bunch of them myself. And these are a resource they can use for illustrations while they're teaching. They can use in their small groups. They can use them however they want. They're there for them to help equip them. The book, Doubting Toward Faith, I intentionally designed it where I put a study guide at the end of every chapter so that, people could get together in small groups and work through the book together so that they could be encouraged about their Christian faith, but also figure out a way to be honest and figure out how they can be real with each other. And I just hope that pastors and church leaders will be aware that people are going to have their questions, they're going to have their doubts. And so part of discipleship means properly caring for people's doubts and taking care of them.
This, again, let's talk about those. OneMinuteApologist.com is a great resource. And so, again, find that there. Of course, you can also find it on iTunes. And, of course, you'll find a lot of YouTube videos and things of that nature. DoubtingTowardsFaith.com. And, of course, that's the title of the book. And I was struck just a few minutes ago that you mentioned Aquinas because, I remember the book, The Silence of St. Thomas. Here's a man who put together the Summa Theologica, but then at one point sets his pen down. It's like, okay, he's got all the logical arguments for the faith and certainly provided one of the great, if you will, encyclopedias or systematic theologies, whatever you want to call it, of the faith. But then there is that mystical aspect of the Christian faith that even apart from all the mountains of evidence that you apologists are putting together, still doesn't quite fulfill the real need in our heart to actually know God in a personal way as well.
And I'm thankful for that because think about all the people throughout the world that don't have the tools available to them as new believers or the seminaries where they can even study through all of these questions. And so God, through the power of His Holy Spirit, we can have the assurance of our salvation, and we can feel good about our faith and that we know God without having to feel like we've studied it exhaustively. In fact, sometimes the more we study, the more we can get confused, but that, again, is not just a Christian problem. That's anyone's problem.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, we have credible answers to curious questions that we struggle with.
Well, Bobby Conway, I certainly appreciate the good work you've done over the years through 1 Minute Apologist. And, of course, this book is just outstanding, Doubting Towards Faith, published by Harvest House, 10 chapters, which, as you mentioned, have questions for further thought and discussion. And so if you want to really minister to people in your congregation, in your small group, in your Bible fellowship, whatever it might be, this might be a book that you can work through together with those discussion questions. And, of course, as I've mentioned just a few minutes ago, there are other videos and resources available to you. So take this and really encourage people so that if they are struggling with and have some level of doubt, you can help them along the way. And I just appreciate, Bobby, the work that you've done. And thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, and I appreciate your work as well, Kerby. Thanks for having me on. It was a real privilege to be with you today.
Again, we will post all of this information on the website, but let me cover it real quickly once again. First of all, of course, we have the doubtingtowardsfaith.com and 1 Minute Apologist, and those resources are certainly available on the website. We have information about the book. We have the video, which I would really encourage you to take the time to watch. And then, as we've made as an assignment, click that share button. Send it on to some other people that maybe don't know about this book. There are all sorts of people that are maybe struggling with doubt in their life and don't even know that there are books written on the subject, and this certainly would be one that I would want to put in their hands. If you find yourself saying there were some great things that he said, but I missed them because they came too quickly, the good news is that you can go to our website right now, pointofview.net, and you can actually listen to it again, just to get the podcast, or you can watch it again if you'd like, and that is available on our YouTube channel. And so simply go to pointofview.net. You'll see a red button there that says watch or listen to you, and I would certainly encourage you to take the through our matching challenge. Here's a great opportunity for you to support this ministry, and over the last 2 hours, if you've learned something about world religions, learned something about doubt, I would certainly encourage you to consider what you might do to support this ministry, because your gift of $50 becomes $100, your gift of $100 becomes $200. So think about maybe even just a one-time gift as a way of saying thank you for the material that we make available to you. Also, I want to encourage you to join us tomorrow. I have Max Lucado in studio. Glory Days, going to be a great interview with him, and so I certainly would encourage you to make a point of listening to Point of View tomorrow in that first hour. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow with Max Lucado.
Please remember September, the month that your gift to Point of View will be doubled. Give $25, it becomes $50. Give $50, it becomes $100. One of the ministry's very special friends wants to motivate you to give, especially if you've never given before. No gift is too little nor too big. Please give generously. Help us equip believers to represent Jesus Christ in this very important and critical hour. Call now and give 1-800-347-5151 or online at pointofview.net. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net.
From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room. Tony and Elizabeth Jordan's marriage is turning into a battle, and their daughter is caught in the crossfire until Elizabeth meets Miss Clara.
This is my favorite place in this house. I call it my war room.
And learns that prayer is a powerful weapon. War Room. Now playing. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at warroomthemovie.com.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.